So this is the 1950 hours GMT edition, part 2 of the BabyAngelGeronimo edition's KhoodeelaarTV television channel. This one starts with an update. We take the update post from the Times newspaper online, which says that Conor Burns, who is the trade minister who has been sacked by Lies Truss over lecherous sexual behavior towards a male person at the Tory conference that ended in Birmingham 3 days ago, has been lined up to be made a sir, that is knighthood, to be given by Boris Johnson in his what is called outgoing resignation honors list. How can this be honors list? I mean, this whole country is controlled by crooks and criminals in government, in executive agencies. Who is that? So therefore, there will be an additional point of conflict facing Lies Truss, because Conor Burns has now lined up a number of his kind of friends, blaming Lies Truss for doing this hasty thing, sacking him. And there is a lot of similar sentiments being expressed by others. And in a piece in the Times, not in the Times, that in the first part, Sebastian Payne promoting Michael Gove. As he said, Gove is and has been and will remain forever a corrupt individual. And Sebastian Payne left out the main role that Gove played as a so-called journalist. The main reason why Gove was given the platform by Dirty Digger Murdoch on the Times as a senior reporter or lead writer or an editor, not the editor of the paper, but he was an editor of some department. The main reason why Gove was chosen by Dirty Digger Murdoch was because Gove fitted Dirty Digger Murdoch's kind of requirements, or for example, the Dirty Digger Murdoch organized the whole shebang. Gove being the interviewer of Donald Trump after Trump was declared president. That was done in a serial, fraudulent, lying episodes. What happened was that the event was orchestrated by Dirty Digger Murdoch because he was longtime ally and friend of Donald Trump. But as the filmed interview by Gove of the newly, quote, announced American president showed, there was no sign of Dirty Digger Murdoch in the footage. But the footage was recorded with Dirty Digger Murdoch being in the room and directing the whole thing. the question and the answers. So Gove was that corrupt. Gove never told anyone that that is what happened. Somebody else had to declare this and make this public, that Gove was actually used there by Rupert Murdoch. Whatever the extent or the amount of benefit that Dirty Digger derived from Trump, the first interview after he got elected, is not known. But it cannot have done any damage to Trump, nor to Gove. But Gove is damaged because when it became clear that he had been playing the stooge role for Dirty Digger Murdoch, Gove became a non-entity, non-person. He's just a tool for Dirty Digger Murdoch, and that is what Gove has been for, I think, for decades, as a servant of Dirty Digger Murdoch, agenda as a so-called journalist. So this has been interrupted again. So this is a regular occurrence, it seems, to the internet issues. So this update, as we said, about the Conor Burns being lined up by Boris Johnson for a knighthood, that is revealed in a report we have seen this evening on the Times newspaper online. But there is another update which is on the front page of the I newspaper weekend. On the front pages, it is kind of flagged as senior Tories bid to install Sunak as caretaker prime minister. Sunak, of course, is the reference to Rishi Sunak. And as we observed during the last kind of weeks and days of the so-called contest for the Conservative Party leadership between Sunak and Lies Truss. We didn't call her Lies Truss at that stage, but we knew she was a liar. Now, the thing that was most noticeable to us on the evidence of her behavior was that Lies Truss was issuing at electric speed far too many promises in a very short time. And the promises were intended to be drawing attention to her, number one, and number two, they were intended to kind of entice the most gullible among the gullible little Englanders, among the Conservative Party voters. And to any rational observer, that kind of promises, that kind of frequency, that kind of variety, and that kind of desperation could not be the product of a stable, rational, practical, honest, competent mind. So, no matter how many times she produced whatever excuse as part of our ploy, Liz Truss never, and she never will come across as Margaret Thatcher. Liz Truss has always been very, very shallow. So, what to do with this kind of double shallow situation? Conor Burns is a lecherous creep whom Liz Truss was absolutely correct to sack. But that doesn't make Liz Truss any more competent or any more honest than she is or would be. And by being made or named publicly, Conor Burns has become a liability not only for the Conservative Party but also for the image, the fading image of the congenital liar Boris Johnson, who is struggling to recreate a personality so that he can, leave a legacy. However, corruptly, the legacy was manufactured by him. And the side road, Egerton Drive, I think, from the High View Avenue, somewhere in Basildon, where a group of white schoolboys were seen behaving in a racist way. Now, that is significant. Why? Because that happens to be the very center of the constituency that David Amis represented for so long. And David Amis is still remembered by most ordinary people in Basildon as having been a good constituency MP. And the question is, would David Amis be impressed by these racist schoolboys? Question mark. It seems that legacies of past MPs or past prime ministers are produced, created, confected as much on the evidence as much on fantasy as well. And Johnson may think that his legacy will be bigger than it is, but it will not be. Because Johnson, as Gove has confessed to Sebastian Payne of the Financial Times, Johnson made a number of serious blunders and mistakes. And Johnson and Gove fell out because of mutual distrust and mutual dishonesty, etc., etc., etc. Now, Sebastian Payne is intellectually too incompetent and too ignorant to have been able to cope with the bankruptcy of Gove and Johnson and Lies Truss. So the Financial Times piece, it may be promoted as a heavy duty kind of FT launch or launch with the FT, one of the specialties of the Financial Times, noticed in the last few weeks. Well, it may have been going on longer than the last few weeks, but we have noticed it only in the last few weeks. Now, the bankruptcy of Boris Johnson and Michael Gove and Liz Truss is not the only bankruptcy. The main bankruptcy is the British so-called government, British state, is a bankrupt state, morally bankrupt, because there is no constitution. Why is having a constitution equal to a state and society being bankrupt? Simple. Because without a constitution properly drafted and agreed, any member of any part of the state or society can do whatever they like with no accountability for their behavior, their actions. And that is how it is going. What the color of these various careerists is secondary or tertiary importance. What they do is of the utmost importance. Totally depends on the fact that they can get away with the wrong things or they cannot get away with the wrong things. They cannot get wrong things if there are rules, if there are constitutional codes. There is no written constitution in this country. So most of the central government appointments, this, that, and the other, are carried out by following the rule of the jungle. I mean, there is no accountability. So whoever is in power, whoever sits in power, in the positions of power, can do whatever they like, whatever they fancy, whatever they whimsically want. All studies, all observations of Boris Johnson from the beginning of his time in the 1990s as a novice journalist, all observations of Boris Johnson publicly and accessibly, all observations of Boris Johnson point to one destination. He is depraved, he is dishonest. Added to that, he is a confident racist, criminally confident racist. Now, Michael Gove may claim that he is better than Boris Johnson, but the fact that he has remained off and on friendly terms with Johnson, while Johnson has been wreaking havoc on and to and through all the moral values and principles, says as much about Gove's bankruptcy as it does about Boris Johnson's bankruptcy and congenital criminality. David Amis was, of course, an MP for Basildon. And as an MP for that area, he represented more or less a very backward kind of collection of individuals. Politically backward, morally backward, socially backward, etc., etc. The whole of the Essex area is wrongly represented by the people that have kind of got themselves there after being unable to cope with London. We can talk about the lack of constitution in every respect, because the being accountability, I mean, the likes of Johnson and Cameron can appoint as many House of Lords members as they fancy. It is not accountable, and no matter what the so-called official opposition may say, they cannot stop it. And as I said at the beginning, not of this particular edition, but at the beginning of the broadcast, after the December 2019 election, so-called, because the Conservatives got about 80%, there was no need to pretend that this was going to be democratically open to removing. The majority of 80 or even 70 or 60 is such a huge number in proportionate terms that if the opposition remains within the confines of that numbers and the numerical kind of arithmetic in the House of Commons, then they will never defeat the government ever on any issue, let alone to dislodge and to overthrow the government and force an election. And Keir Starmer will never dislodge them whatsoever. Keir Starmer is grinning or would be grinning only if a third party or third source, like including the Conservatives, create a crisis in the party of the type that would mean that Truss would be replaced by Sunak, which is what they are reporting on the I newspaper. And that is based on a very soon. But the essential factor about Constitution is that Constitution, a written code of conduct, gives power, legitimacy to the have-nots and to those without power, without voice, and without any other say of any kind. Available to people in society. I mean, there is no counting the number of lies that Johnson has perpetrated, and no counting the number of lies that the Conservatives perpetrated, no counting the number of lies that Starmer has perpetrated, and so on. But all of these lying and all of these kind of exposures come to light by accident. Because there is no constitution, constitutional steps cannot be taken after each of the perpetrations of violating the constitution. So, for example, in the High Court, when people like Salibarco defamed McAlpine, who is now deceased, with a short tweet saying, "Why is he trending? Innocent face." Now, that was treated by the High Court, Queen's Bench Division, at the demand of McAlpine, who sued as the named perpetrator. Sorry, who McAlpine was the one that was defamed, according to the High Court judge that heard McAlpine's application against Salibarco. And McAlpine was given the benefit of the meaning of the words. And why is he trending? And innocent face? Now, the innocent face bit added extraordinary weight to the claim for defamation against claim damages for defamation claimed against Salibarco by the McAlpine family on his behalf, of course. So McAlpine won the case against Salibarco. Why? Not because Salibarco had said something extraordinarily defamatory, obviously defamatory, but because the court itself is corrupt. The court was already predisposed against Salibarco, and the court was predisposed in favor of McAlpine. Now, these are the types of things that happen without a constitution. If there were a written constitution, then it would have provisions for democratically dealing with any transgressions and any antisocial behavior by the likes of Salibarco, or it could be against anybody else, by anybody else. Salibarco was the subject of sustained attacks by the media, by Fleet Street. Not because Fleet Street wanted Salibarco to be made an example where minor articles published in a publication can be cited against the publication concerned, suing that publication for defamation. The newspapers want no defamation law, in fact. What they want is a token law of defamation. But the Salibarco episode showed that no matter who the kind of complainant was or is, I mean, their word spoke volumes against a defendant like Salibarco, who neither had the means, that the money with which to retaliate against the attacks on her by McAlpine, nor was she being supported by the Fleet Street tabloids. And the reference, the relevance to this of having or not having a constitution is this: if there were a written code of conduct, which is the constitution, then a lot of the defamation claims would collapse, would not exist. And the fact that McAlpine was a conservative and Salibarco was a Labour supporter meant that they took it from the beginning, they took it as for granted that Salibarco would have a bad press throughout if the thing went through an actual trial. Knowing that, McAlpine's side played crafty role, and they used the media to create maximum pressure on Salibarco. And they did that by overt publishing of her kind of ill-advised tweet against McAlpine. They also used the fact that Salibarco was married to the speaker at the time. So speaker was originally a conservative, but after he became a speaker, he ceased to have any real party alliances. Partisan individual still had lots and lots of influence in the media propaganda department. So when the media descended on him and demanded various answers to various questions, it did so by being totally hostile from the beginning to the Barcos. And although in other cases, these newspapers were very sympathetic to the likes of the Daily Sun and this Daily SCUM, on this occasion, because the parties were separately identifiable. McAlpine was a conservative, and Sully was a Labour supporting member of the public. So what the Constitution would have done would have been to restrict the endless length to which McAlpine's side and the Fleet Street tabloids supporting him would have been able to attack Sully Barco prior to any trial. And it is astonishing that Sully Barco didn't suffer a breakdown as a result of the pressure mounted against her from McAlpine is a multi-millionaire and the entire establishment of the conservatives in the conservative establishment and party. I intervened not on this one. As a result of my interventions, many, not one, not two, dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of cases which would have been litigated as defamation litigations were not litigated litigations. Defamers, whom I supported all the time, or alleged defamer, gave up. Now, if you multiply just 4 defamation cases, and if you add together the 2000, well, 2020, these 4 items that were needed to be actually dissected, and the defamation claim diffused. Sully Barco went through a nightmare few months, after which she gave up and she gave in. And McAlpine was declared as having won because he was declared as having been innocent. If there was a constitution, written constitution, first of all, there would be no need for going to the defamation case court. There would have been clear written guidelines as to what constituted pedophilia and child sex abuse, etc., and what evidential prerequisites would have been. And Sully Barco would have been spared the nightmare experience that she suffered. And she probably would have not been put on the record as the defamer of McAlpines. Similarly, if there were a constitution in place in the UK, criminal, congenital liar Boris Johnson would not dare to nominate Conor Burns, even without the allegations of groping and lecherous behavior against him being published or not published. Because Conor Burns, by all accounts, is a conservative trash. He has not done any service to the wider public, to the community, to society. And look at the list of the others in the lineup that the liar Boris Johnson has put on the line as new members of the House of Peers. Now look at the cost. If a member of the House of Peers goes to the House of Disrepute, that is the House of Peers, and if they spend only a few minutes, and if they enter on the attendance register the purpose of their being in there as being relevant to some political event, then they can claim daily expenses of hundreds of pounds just for being there for an hour or even less. You multiply that by the number of House of Peers members that there are, and multiply that amount by the numbers that actually turn up for the simple reason of pocketing that money. It would be hundreds of pounds, and there is no challenge. No nomination for either knighthood or any other what they call gongs, honors so called, or nomination to the House of Peers would be permitted if there were a constitution and the constitution had precise requirements, minimum qualifications, and minimum rigorous test. So not having a constitution gives the criminal license to criminals like Boris Johnson to do whatever they like, while they starve the starving millions in this country. They're in poor income, low income, and the people in low income and in poverty generally cannot cite the constitutional right if they go to court contesting the misconduct of the Department for Work and Pensions or department misbehaving in not paying the basic income to them they're entitled to. So the DWP could not do what it did under Dracula Duncan Smith. Ian Dracula Duncan Smith caused the suicides of hundreds of the most vulnerable people. That was Ian Duncan Smith causing the suicide by regularly ordering the DWP machine to deny most vital and needed support to the most vulnerable people. And this went on for years, during which time hundreds or more than 1,000 people committed suicide. When the people are put in that kind of position, there needs to be no argument that they cannot be saved from that kind of suicide or suicidal ends to their lives without there being constitution and without there being constitutional guarantees against excessive oppressive behavior by the Department for Work and Pensions and by the Secretary of State at the DWP. Behaving criminally and recklessly, because they know that there is no constitution and there is no holding them back, holding them to account for their criminality and their gross abuse of their positions. And the case the constitution has been very strong from the beginning, and yet there is no movement for there to be a written constitution in this country. Can you imagine? With the basic guarantees. And those basic guarantees would necessarily include guarantees derived from the Universal Declarations of Human Rights and other rights that are alien to the constitution-less jungle of a country like the UK in terms of the state. So, for example, Boris Johnson, when he becomes retired, he can then bribe dozens of his mates, and on the back door they can then exchange the goodies among themselves, and nobody can count changes hands. And this goes on every time. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn's stupidity is not a secret. They keep saying, including this week, they've said that Lies Truss is unpopular, even less popular than Jeremy Corbyn ever was when he was leader of the Labour Party. And Corbyn, as I've said in the last 3 years, starting his broadcasts, but I've said it before in other forms, in other comments and other statements. Corbyn was leader, and as leader, he was at the top of the list of news events every day. Anything he said, any scheduled to say on a day, on an issue, would have been at the very top of the running order, as they say, in the newsroom. Which means that if he said something, say about the murder of David Kelly. David Kelly was the scientist, weapons inspector, weapons specialist who expressed grave reservations about the claims being made by Tony Blair that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. And mysteriously, within a short number of days, David Kelly was found to have committed quote suicide. Very odd. And there is no investigation. I mean, there has never been a real investigation of how David Kelly was murdered. With the Chilcot report, there is no truth about why the Chilcot report should have taken as long as it did take. And there is no explanation in the scheme of things without a constitution in the UK as to why, even though they are not all contained in the report, the number of allegations and claims made against Tony Blair about Iraq and Afghanistan, those should not be used as evidence for prosecuting Tony Blair. If there were a constitution which says that head of government or a member of parliament, whichever the case may be or would have been, would be prosecuted automatically if they took the country to war without evidence, which is what Blair did. And that the country, the United Kingdom, would pay real life damages to the victims of their unlawfully taking the country to the war, etc., etc., etc. So this is the kind of thing, in short, that would have been possible to achieve if there were a written constitution. And I'm making the case. Just look at the list of them. Gordon Brown doesn't want a written constitution. Tony Blair most certainly doesn't want a written constitution. And the liars in the rest of the parties don't want a written constitution. What kind of jungle is that? And the answer is that this is only kind of possible because of the ratification of a number of international treaties by the United Kingdom, not the treaties to join various parts of the European Union, etc., but other international treaties that are keeping the United Kingdom just about functioning. But the United Kingdom is functioning as an unlawful, illegal state. Of those treaty obligations to its so-called citizens. So when the ethnicity-linked criminal like the Goan origin Suella Braverman issues brazenly racist kind of opinion about the need to limit migrants from Asia and Africa, she would not have been able to do that if there were a constitution, written constitution, which said that a member of the House of Commons and a member of the House of Peers, whichever may be appropriate, would not be allowed to make any proposal for enacting any legislation that broke the UK's international treaty obligations in the field. And the list goes on. When the Crossrail Bill was passed, when the Crossrail Bill was tabled, there was a statement very near the motion saying, has the mover or has the Secretary of State asked himself or themselves whether the bill as written complies with the UK's international obligations? And Alistair Darling, who was the Secretary of State at the time, answered in the affirmative. He said, yes, that was a lie. Because if he truthfully had examined the contents of the Crossrail Bill in the light of the constitutional obligations and examined chapter and by chapter the implications of the people on the root of the various aspects of the proposals, then he could not have said that the bill as written complied with all the requirements of the international organizations. Now, we raised objections successfully and we defeated the government on that. Now, that was in the history of the United Kingdom Parliament and ordinary public campaigns. That is very, very rare, in fact, unheard of. Of course, to be found in the fact that we knew the Constitution and we applied our knowledge of the Constitution, that we knew the community and we mobilized opinion in the community accordingly. Think about that. We did not mobilize the community physically because it would be impossible. The community affected by the Crossrail whole proposal was numerically mainly Bangladeshi in and around the Brick Lane area. And these are the very people we are talking, let's say, between 2003 up till 2010, let's say. 7 years of campaign later, the government gave up and they withdrew this proposal to dig the hole in Brick Lane very quietly. They didn't do it in a beating drums, but they quietly dropped it. Saying that no government had done about any proposal anywhere in the UK in terms of civil campaigns. We say to the viewers, whoever may be viewing, whenever they may be viewing this, if they don't agree with this and if they have evidence to contradict what I've been saying, let us know. We would like to know. But we know that we defeated the government in an unprecedented way. Two examples we give as contrast currently. One is the HS2 legislation, and the other is the Heathrow extension, the third terminal. Both these items, these developments, if you like, or have been opposed by the largest possible numbers of bourgeois, middle class, etc., individuals. What the fuck have they done? They have done fuck all. They have not been able to move one thing. And the government has gone ahead. Note the difference between the Khoodeelaar campaign and all these people they have sent. They have spent millions of pounds because in the case of Crossrail, we did not have access to millions of pounds. What we did have is access to Muhammad Haque. And Muhammad Haque's dedication amounted to having more than millions of pounds. Because the questions that Muhammad Haque put to the liars were beyond the liars' abilities at any stage to answer. None of their QCs, none of their permanent secretaries, none of their ministers could begin to answer the questions. And those questions came every day. Now, these people who oppose HS2 include many local councils on the way, from Euston, London to Birmingham, let's say. Dozens of local councils combined and contributed to a pool, millions of pounds to cover the legal costs claimed by the QCs, etc., etc., etc. What did the QCs write? They wrote fuck all. So therefore, having no constitution meant that these people who behaved just like the so-called friends of BabyAngelGeronimo did. The so-called friends, not all of the people who turned up as friends during the various displays and various demonstrations, so-called, or comments to the media. Many of the people who sympathized with BabyAngelGeronimo did so genuinely, humanitarian, well, Geronimo grounds. But many were Trojan horses for the depraved Defra. They came as spies. They came as saboteurs. They came as misinformers who misinformed the genuine supporters of BabyAngelGeronimo to the effect that they should give up. So the people who oppose the HS2 have been behaving almost identically. Now these idiots going into a tunnel near Houston, what the fuck would that do? Stop the government machine? It would not. So you can see that literally these people are going into the tunnel, blind. The way to stop the government machine of corruption is to expose their lies locally, which we did in Tower Hamlets, absolutely daily, to the point where the then leader of the Tower Hamlets Council, for a period, Michael Crook, I mean, his name officially is Michael Keith, allegedly currently now based at Oxford as a professor. This Crook would go there to the council office or offices as early as 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning, as recalled to me by one of the so-called press officers who was working at the time in the council as an employee. And according to this recollection, Michael Crook would say, I don't know what Muhammad Haque is doing to destroy me today. And I did not destroy him physically. I didn't have to. I destroyed him in terms of the credibility and legitimacy as the council leader, which is what I did effectively to every single one of the targets. Just as I persuaded Zulfikar Ali Bhutto to abandon the confrontation with me at the Institute of Engineers in the 1960s in Dhaka, in East Pakistan, and abandon his project of establishing himself as the leader of the second political party in East Pakistan. I destroyed his dream totally by destroying him by 9 questions, with 9 questions that I put to him, one after the other. Okay, so that is how I destroy those residents of the land of the jungles without any constitution. Michael Crook, not once, several times we condemned him to his face. And instead of answering the evidence-based condemnation, this Crook boy racistly tried to pick holes personally about me. There was no hole he could pick. And as he did that in September 2005 in the Hanbury Street outside the Brady Center, he was seen for what he was. He was a racist liar. Done something wrong? I had not. there told him off. Get lost, and he did get lost. He walked away. But we were demonstrating there outside the Brady Center because we had known that Michael Crook was coming to deliver a prestige lecture to a group of people inside the Brady Center. And we demonstrated with the usual microphone and loud hailers, and I spoke. So effective was my intervention that Michael Crook gave up that presentation, and he came outside and he tried to insult me personally. And the people who witnessed that knew that he was lying, so they told him to get lost. Then I published several articles online, internet, condemning him, naming him. And the Crook has not yet answered. This is what, 2005, 2015 is the 10 years, and it's coming to 20 years since the incident. The criminal boy would not dare to lie in public on print. But criminal boy had ethnic surrogates in Tower Hamlets among the community, those who indirectly carried his baggage and his bag, and they tried to smear me in mysterious kind of silence or secret communications. None of those criminals has come out and stated a single one of the lies by identifying themselves, etc., etc. Michael Crook is out of the council, which we promised as one of the things we shall be doing. When we started to campaign against the council's role in inviting the Crossrail hole, we said we'll get rid of the leadership, which you did. Abbas, alias Halal, would never be the MP for the area, which we said we would ensure he would not be. And he has not been. He cannot be. And so on. Various careers we have crushed. We have crushed careers by telling the truth about them, the criminals. And the community has been defended from Crossrail's attack. But the community is defending from other attacks, continuing attacks by the council, continuing attack from the city and will to defend the community as a model example of democratic resistance and democratic defense of the community. And we can only do that. We could have only done that by never being in a relationship with any council, any government organization, any minister, or anybody that depended on our accepting any money or any other benefits from them. No way. And that is the strength of morality. And that is what is happening currently in the debate, in the discourse. How it will end, we cannot predict, but the discourse that is on display now in Pakistan, with Imran Khan setting out and spelling out the manifesto against the criminals, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's family and Nawaz Sharif's family. These are two of the main gangs of crooks that have been fleecing Pakistan and have been robbing the ordinary people of Pakistan for 75 years. Well, not 75 years, because those ones have not been in power for that long, but most of the, let's say, last 30 years. That is what Imran Khan reckons. But our demand from East Pakistan, as it was, to Imran Khan remains principally for Imran Khan to apologize unconditionally for the attacks on the innocent civilians in East Pakistan by the military regime or the military brigade or military assault headed by his relation Niazi. Imran Khan's name is Niazi. So his family member Amir Abdullah Khan Niazi, who is now deceased, led the assault on the people, civilian people in East Pakistan, children, women, old people, vulnerable people in East Pakistan during most of 1971. Most because the actual confrontations began into the month of March, I think, and they ended with the 16th of December 1971 infliction on the Pakistan army, infliction of the defeat by Indira Gandhi's Indian, mainly air raids and aerial bombardments. Now, the 16th of December kind of surrender by the Pakistan army to the Indian army was the opposite of what happened in 1965. In September 1965, the then military administration head Ayub Khan had declared war against India, mainly along the borders along West Pakistan and India and in Kashmir. And one East Pakistan Air Force squadron leader called Alam, a chief and positive recommendations in dispatches because of his drowning or downing not one but several Indian Air Force fighter planes, mainly around Calcutta. Now, he had a row with me at the University of Dhaka, where he was actually assuming credit for his brother's kind of military bravery and skills himself. So, to destroy this pretender in front of his mates, most of them came from the Notre Dame College. Notre Dame College was a symbol of British Empire left behind and the British kind of superiority. I came from a civil, locally funded college. So they always felt that they were superior to our college. And I was conscious of that. So during the debate being held at the arts building in the University of Dhaka, I and advocated in such a ferocious way that this boy like Bhutto did a runner from the scene because he could not put up with the arguments that I was making, etc., etc. So this is the lesson of moral campaign, ethical campaign, democratic campaign. You don't have to have resorts to military kind of weapons when you are doing this. And you have to know your facts and the evidence. And you have to know your community, and you have to know where you are going and where you are coming from. In the case of the confrontation between the police and black youths in Tottenham, in Haringey, In October 1985, various heroics, including attributions of various heroic claims against the police by the supposed black youths, including the one that has been mostly reported at the time, the claim attributed to Barney Grant that the police got a bloody good hiding. These are absolutely stupid statements. Because if the police got a bloody good hiding, as I have said, how was it that the black youths did not solidarize with one another? The black community did not solidarize with those who were yet to be continued to be attacked by the police, which is what is happening even now, nearly 40 years later. The Chris Kaba, who was murdered by the Metropolitan Police in South London last month, that is September, he was going to become an architect. He was not a drug dealer, he was not a criminal, he was not on anybody's list of crimes. So, why did the police murder him? The only crime he committed, according to the murderer police, was that he was a black man driving a car. How far, how far is the community society lagging from where it should be? As for Sadiq Khan, who is supposed to be the current mayor at the expense of London, worse, Sadiq Khan is supposed to be the mayor whom the Metropolitan Police are accountable. Can you believe it? So, what has Sadiq Khan to say about the murder of Chris Kaba? How does he explain the murder of an innocent black man? A black man who is so far, obviously, these comments I'm making are based on published accounts. I have no direct personal knowledge of the family, and I obviously didn't know Chris Kaba. But most of the facts are they resonate and they are comparable with the profile of Stephen Lawrence. Lawrence was also a student of architecture. Now, why would the police murder such a young man? Only because he is black. Only because he is black. How does being black constitute a crime? Does it mean that black lives matter? Of course it doesn't. And the people who claim to have been doing campaigns for on the theme of Black Lives Matter, significantly they have been silent. And of course, there is no trace of the people who shouted black section in the Labour Party. No black MP, no black member of the House of Peers. Now, leave aside Stephen Lawrence's mom and dad. They're not objectively to be cited. They're very much involved as still grieving parents of Stephen Lawrence. But other people, what have they done to create the seismic kind of shaking that should have been felt by the leaders of the Metropolitan Police? Where is that shaking? And who stopped the black councillors in and around London, in this country? Who stopped the elected black politicians from getting organized and demanding that the Metropolitan Police and racism be separated for good, and that Metropolitan Police be made to pay for the racist attacks and violations and spying and framing of the last 100 years? For as long as black people have been in this country, especially in the capital London, the police have the police individually and the police force as a kind of collective entity, they have been given license de facto to go around doing what Johan said on nigger hunt or on hunting for suitable targets. How is it that Trevor Terrible P-Lips, who keeps getting the platform on the Sky News, the Times newspaper, on the Daily Mail, what has he done? What has he said about the murdering racist policing in London? What about the schools? What are they being taught about the importance of lives of the likes of Chris Kaba? Why does Chris Kaba get murdered, or Chris Kabas? Why do they get murdered by the police just for driving a car? Where is the lesson? So we say that a constitution in place, a written constitution with codes of conduct, codes of duties, would have been easily, immediately mentionable whenever something like this happens. Instead, the murder of Chris Kaba is being used as a kind of routine ritual game. Chris Kaba's girlfriend or a fiancée who is about to give birth to their child. I mean, what has she done to deserve this? And the child, if the child is safely born, what could the child be told? Because the child's father was not a criminal. He was going to be an architect, one of the most traditional kind of careers, jobs that anyone can do. And that would be architect has been murdered for being on the road driving a car and for not being white, not for being black. And this constitution is badly needed in this country. This country is the only one that doesn't have a constitution. And the fact that it doesn't have a constitution gives too many criminals in state powers and state positions too much kind of freedom to do too many crimes and get away too many times, too often get away. The de facto definition of a constitution is not written in any dictionary or any kind of textbook. It is my interpretation. The constitution, to borrow a phrase or to borrow a key word, a constitution is necessary to make a society civilized, behave in a civilized way. Now, first of all, of course, there has to be admission of the existence of society, unlike Thatcher's denial. Thatcher said there is no such thing as society. Of course, there has to be admission that there is a thing called society. And the presence of of a constitution presupposes the acceptance of a society or acceptance of the need for a society. And by definition, society itself entails acceptance by each of the individuals in it of the rights of the other individuals. Now, it seems that for over 100 years, 150 years or 100 years, the Metropolitan Police have not been told these basic facts. All the allegations against the police from all kinds of complainants have so much in common between the complaints. And all these complaints are like the police behave more or less the way that Wayne Couzens behaved when he stopped Sarah Everard. He threatened her, he abused his card, his police identity, he took her in his custody de facto. He then took her to wherever he took her, and he raped her, and then he burnt her. Now, in doing all of these things, while he was doing all of these things, he was still a serving so-called in-post member of the Metropolitan Police Force. Now, where had he got any of these ideas that he could do any of these things to Sarah? What was Sarah? She was not even black. She was not only not black, she was, by all accounts, very conventional, white, blonde, professional individual. She was not doing any crime. And the least that she deserved was respect and protection and a safe passage home. The least. Now, those like the Daily Mail who condemned Sadiq Khan for allegedly sacking Cressida Dick. Now, do they have any conscience? And did they think that a woman like Sarah Everard, I mean, she did not deserve any of what she was given? And where in hell? What hell should Wayne Cousins be consigned to, sent to? She was violated in the most complete list that only could be found in hell. What crimes had Sarah Everard committed? Has the Daily Mail, which attacks those who influenced the sacking of President Dick, has the Daily Mail ever thought about this? Has anyone in the Daily Mail, a family, have they got any children? Have they got a daughter? And would they want their daughter to be treated in any way like Sarah was? And if anyone treated their daughter in that way, what would they do to them? What would they want to do to them? And who would be held responsible for the presence of even one single Wayne Cousins in the whole force? One single Wayne Cousins was one too many. Who allowed Wayne Cousins to be there in the Metropolitan Police? What was he doing in the Metropolitan Police? What was the Metropolitan Police about? Who recruited Wayne Cousins and to do what? And what were the recruitment conditions and processes? What criteria were followed about the recruitment to the police? It was not recruiting to the gang, to a mafia. Who authorized that recruitment process? Which meant that Wayne Cousins, who would have been stopped at the first points because of his records previously, he sailed through to the point where he created absolute hell for Sarah Everard and her parents, her family, and nobody seems to care. Not even now, not when they're persecuting these other women who protested, who dared to protest. They have been persecuted by Metropolitan Police now. So Sarah Everard being literally put through hell, has left the Metropolitan Police completely intact. It hasn't lost any of its licenses to do anything except do the right thing, for which the police should be funded by the public. The police should not be funded by the public. The police should not be endorsed by the police. The public should not endorse the Metropolitan Police, and the police should not be endorsed by the public in financial terms, in legal terms, in legitimacy. If even one single police member does anything that is contrary to the law, contrary to the basic duty, the list of duties that the top of which stands the protection of the public. Sarah Everard was deprived of that protection, and then she was completely taken through hell from that point onwards. Which police commentator has said what after Sarah Everard was treated in that way, misled, put into custody, raped, murdered. What police commentator has said what to stop the police? Full stop, stop the police. There is no need for policing. Why not? Why can't they say there is no need for policing? There is no need for a police force if that is what it is about, if that is what the police do. First of all, when Cousins does what he did, and then series of women protesting are being persecuted even now. What is going on? So why do they want these long inquiries about what goes on, what goes wrong in the police? Why should there be an inquiry? What they are doing brazenly in public, in front of the public every day is more than any inquiry can actually produce. Inquiry can only produce delay, excuses, diversions, and so on. I mean, Chris Kaba, Sarah Everard. Take two examples, but there are dozens of others every year. Why should Chris Kaba be murdered and the police then be allowed to engage in a serial game of denial, of fabrication, of diversion? How is Chris Kaba's murder? How? On what basis is Chris Kaba's murder? I mean, remotely acceptable. On what proposition? What construction? How does murdering someone like Chris Kaba, murdering by the police, justify the need for policing? And where are the, again, members of parliament raising these questions? Where are the commentators, as I said before, raising these questions? We shall be continuing in the next parts, evidentially examining various agencies of the state, components of the state, various holders of positions of the state. And we shall be looking at the role of the House of Commons, the House of Lords, so called. And we shall be offering updated evidential documentary justification for creating extensive studies on the plans that Guy Fawkes worked on. Why did he want to blow up Parliament? 400 years ago. 400 years later, Parliament is as sick or sicker as it was 400 years ago. So when these creeps say that they are running the Operation Black Vote, what the fuck? Sending people to the House of Commons for what? What have they said? Come on, bring the evidence. The highest praise given by the morons to Barney Grant was that he wanted the British imperialists to pay money for empire in Africa. Surely. Surely that should not be the only demand. And yet, this is celebrated as his big demand. Reparation to who? The real demand should be about recognizing black lives, if that black lives is what constitutes all the people affected by racist denials and murders. Let's say people of African and Asian origins. All the people of racist, all the people affected by racism, imperialism, must be recognized here and now. And all violations must be proscribed. And all violations should be followed by extensive prosecutions without any question. But these can only be done by a constitution, because there would be written list of things. A constitution, by definition, is a written code, and the written code can have extensive details under every headline, every sectional headline or heading. I mean, when they paid Trevor Phillips to chair the Commission for Racist Enslavement, which was launched in April 1977, when I was present, and David Lane was the first chair of the Commission for Racist Enslavement, I asked questions that none of the others present asked. I asked questions about the purpose of the CRE and the way it would hold racists to account. David Lane clearly was not able to answer my questions. Amazingly, none of the others present followed up my questions, which is what should have happened logically, ethically, evidentially. None of the others, many of them pretending to be black journalists. None. And of course, there were white journalists. The event took place somewhere off Fleet Street, Shoe Lane, in a setting in Shoe Lane, in April 1977. So when Sarah Bosley, the racist at The Guardian, in March 1992, spoke to me on the telephone, and after speaking to me on the telephone, she then did the rounds with Ken Livingston Livingstone, Peter Newsom, who was a later white succeeding David Lane, and assorted other criminals. She started by depicting me as a hero in a novel, Haque and Ryan's novel. And she ended up by saying, these people were saying that I had interrupted and disrupted their meetings. Now, is that the biggest crime in the world? I am absolutely clear about why I disrupted, interrupted meetings of Ken Livingston Livingstone, Peter Newsom, and other racists. I would do that again because they were committing crimes of denial and suppression and obstruction. And I am there to ask questions about the denials and hiding and criminality and collusion, complicity, collaboration, and all that. So I remain as fit as a hero of the Haque and Ryan novels at the beginning as I was always. I mean, she thought that that was what I would have been, a hero in the Haque and Ryan novel. I remain whatever position is assigned to me entirely based on my actions, morality, moral actions. And the fact that these lined up white racists could not find a one act of criminality in the long list that they cited to her of my actions over decades just completes the picture. So we come to an end to this edition at 1:51 minutes, 1 hour 51 minutes. And the time is 21 hours 40 GMT on Saturday, the 8th of October 2022.